Hello, I'm Robert. Welcome to my channel, and this is about something very positive. And this is what, if you follow the World Health Organization, their press briefings for the last week or two have been all about this. And it's just being ignored by the journalists, or not very much attention given to it. But the situation is that we can vaccinate very quickly. What we need is the vaccines to go where they're needed. And we need, if we can have technology transfer, there are companies in the rest of the world who could make these vaccines, but they're not permitted to because of intellectual property rights. And it's very, very unjust the way it's happening. I'm in the United Kingdom, and just about we're rapidly on the way to vaccinate everyone, all the adults, long before summer, and it's the same with the United States. And yet the rest of the world, they will only be able to start vaccinating. Many of them have only just started vaccinating, and most of them will only be able to start vaccinating with any great speed after the wealthy countries have finished using the leftover vaccines that the wealthy countries are not using. So the United States has secured, as advance orders, enough vaccines to vaccinate over 1 billion people, even if everyone in the United States was fully vaccinated twice, in the spring and in the autumn. We will still have enough left for 1.3 billion extra people outside of the United States. And yet they're not going to release any of that until they've vaccinated everyone in the United States. They don't have those doses yet, those are pre-orders. But they're ahead in the queue of COVAX or anyone else for their orders. And so it's really quite difficult for COVAX to get its doses when the wealthy countries have already pre-ordered the vaccines way into the future like that. And the United States has a stockpile of tens of millions of the AstraZeneca vaccine that they're leaving on the shelves because they have not yet approved them. And these vaccines, the World Health Organization say to all countries worldwide, and they're saying that repeatedly in these press briefings, they're saying, if you've got any vaccines, if you are not sure about AstraZeneca, or you just haven't authorized it yet, then lend them to us. We can put them, just swap them position in the queue. We can put these vaccines straight into people's arms. And then you can have our position later in the queue when you need the vaccines. So, in my view, and there are some doctors in the United States saying this, then the United States should immediately release all the AstraZeneca vaccines that they have in stockpile. Tens of millions. They've released 4 million. They've given 2.5 million to Mexico and 1.5 million to Canada. They have tens of millions of doses. We don't know the exact number, I don't think. And they should just release those straight away. We should not have vaccines sitting on the shelf, should go into our arms. Now, for sure, the United States has been very generous. The United States, under Biden, has given $4 billion to the COVAX facility to buy vaccines. But there aren't many vaccines at the moment for COVAX to buy, because they're sitting on shelves in the United States, tens of millions of them. And others are rapidly going into the arms of younger and younger people in the United Kingdom and United States. Now, there are some good actors here. India is giving away half of its doses, the ones that it's of course has committed to make vaccines for Europe, United States and everyone else. So India is one of the big vaccine manufacturers in the world. So some of the vaccines that we use in Europe are from India. But India also has vaccines that it is retained for itself. It retains half of the vaccines that it makes for its own use, and then half of those, if I've got the numbers right, something like that, it doesn't keep for its own country, but it gives the ones it's got its own use of, it gives to neighbouring countries like Bangladesh, which wouldn't have any vaccines, or hardly any by now, but it's vaccinated at the same levels as the Bangladesh is vaccinated. And so if you're going to look down here, let's look at India, and we see what India has done. And I've got a page there, and I'll go up to that in a minute. So this is, no, that's not India. There we are, this is India. So that's India's own doses. It's actually given more of its vaccines. These are in vaccines per 100 people to Bangladesh, and to Sri Lanka is vaccinating more than India itself is. So, there are some other good chinks here. There's the France has committed to give 5%, not half its vaccines, but a 20th of its vaccines to poorer countries. And China of course does not need vaccines. China has eliminated it from its own country. So most people in China, they have a lot of confidence in the Chinese vaccine. They don't have the vaccine hesitancy, but they don't see the point in getting vaccinated because their risk is about zero, because it's been eliminated from China, and they don't have physical distancing. They don't have to do anything in China except when they get an outbreak from reported cases from other countries. So vaccine, and China is a very big vaccine manufacturer. There's a source here that there's, where do I have the list here? Yes, just 4 of China's many vaccine manufacturers claim they can produce at least 2.6 billion doses this year. So that's about enough for everyone in China to be vaccinated just from those, and that's assuming it requires 2 doses. So they've got a big excess capacity, and they're not focusing on vaccinating their own people. They are vaccinating other countries, and that makes, it's not just vaccine diplomacy. It makes sense because the infections in China are coming from other countries. So their best way of protecting their own population is to help other countries vaccinate, because they've already eliminated from their country. They can stop it very quickly. They could quickly vaccinate a hotspot if they need to. So there, China sees the problem as the rest of the world for itself. So it's not just being altruistic, although there's an element of that as well. Health workers and medical professionals in China, their aim is to save lives in the entire world, just like in the United Kingdom and everywhere. So it's not, and yet, so the actual numbers, it's really hard to know. They have given 1 million doses to Pakistan. They've already, I think, and they've given 100,000 to some other countries. But it's a little bit difficult because you get these. This is where is it? The source in Global Times say they're donating doses to Africa, Philippines, etc. I don't have actually any reason to say that's false, but it's part of their propaganda news where you can't really be entirely sure, that you have this question mark always, because they do slant things. But there's no doubt that they're giving lots of doses around the world. Russia is as well. And so we should be doing that as well. Now, as I have said, we do have these finance. The United Kingdom has given nearly $1 billion, or $750 million to COVAX to buy the vaccines, and Biden's given $4 billion. And so later in this year, in the fall particularly, then COVAX will be able to buy the vaccines that start to be produced that are outside, or all the spare ones from the wealthy countries if they sell them, though some of them will be giving them away. Now this is an example, let's just bring that up. This is why it's so important. So the World Health Organization say that even before the vulnerable people, the very top priority are the health workers and the medical experts, especially for the countries with lower the weaker economies and weaker healthcare systems. In a place like Zimbabwe, there are only 2 doctors or health workers, medical professionals, doctors, yeah, this figure is for doctors, sorry, there are only 2 doctors for every 10,000 people. And this doctor, he was also an HIV specialist, very much involved in the fight against HIV, in Zimbabwe. Not that old. I'm not sure what his age is. I haven't looked up, but he's obviously not grey-haired. And he was the foremost heart specialist in the University of Zimbabwe. He was involved in active clinical work, and so he was frontline fighting a pandemic, as well as being an expert. And he was never offered vaccination against COVID. He died on the 26th of January, and this is a big blow to the health service in Zimbabwe. And so they are continuing to lose medical experts. He's top expert like that, foremost expert in Zimbabwe, one of the foremost experts in the University of Zimbabwe, and he's no longer with them. And that is the only reason he died is because the rest of the world is hanging on to its AstraZeneca and so on, those tens of millions of doses, and there are only something like 7,000 doctors in the whole of Zimbabwe. We've only needed 7,000 doses from Europe or the United States to vaccinate every medical worker in Zimbabwe, and yet they didn't feel that they could give that many doses to Zimbabwe because their priority was to vaccinate their people, and they don't feel that they can release the tens of millions of AstraZeneca because they want to make sure they've got those doses when eventually they are approved for Americans. So this is extremely unfair and extremely unethical in my view. I'm not saying that these are bad people in the developed countries. I just don't think they're fully aware of what they're doing and of how unethical it is, what they're doing. And it's just not right when a few thousand vaccines could vaccinate everyone in Zimbabwe, all the medical workers in Zimbabwe, and the medical workers are dying. So the COVAX is beginning to fill this gap, but they're still very far behind because the other countries snapped up the doses first, and they're not releasing them. So they are going to give them away after they have vaccinated their own country. The United States has not yet said it's loaned some of its vaccines to Mexico. Mexico will have to give them back once the United States approves AstraZeneca. So it's not even a donation to Mexico and Canada. They've just loaned it to them, and then so it is a big plus for it'll add a few percent to the number vaccinated in Mexico. It'll make a big difference. So I'm not saying they're doing nothing, but and it's not sensible for themselves, because we now know that vaccines stop transmission. They protect the healthcare systems. A country with a weaker healthcare system is weaker in other respects as well. It's going to be weaker for the world economy. The world GDP will not return to normal so quickly if the virus is still raging in other countries at the end of this year. And then it's a place where variants are going to arise. And then just recently we heard that the South African variant can infect mice, not transgenic mice, normal mice. So that's another possible animal reservoir. We could end up, if we are unlucky, with an animal reservoir in South Africa of mice. And that's because of the variants. And we can, again, the vaccine, rolling out the vaccine, the effective vaccines throughout the world, and they can quickly we can stop this much faster. Now, there's another way that we are not managing to stop it faster. The thing is that we've got these companies, AstraZeneca are good. So AstraZeneca, that's based in Oxford. Well, they're not based in Oxford, but it was the Oxford University. So Sarah Gilbert of the Oxford University, then she felt very strongly that she didn't want to, they could make their own vaccines themselves, but to scale up to billions of doses around the world was just beyond their capability. They have a small company that makes vaccines associated with Oxford University. So Sarah Gilbert, she realised it was important to involve someone at one of the big guys in order to be able to scale up so rapidly. And her condition was that they must make no profit during the pandemic. And all the, like Merck, they didn't actually say, I think they, no, I'm not sure if they said which ones refused, but all the big ones just refused to do that. And then they found AstraZeneca, which is not in the top league, but it's quite a large company. And AstraZeneca agreed to this condition, and their books are going to be audited, and they're going to make no profit from AstraZeneca. Of course, they got huge profit from the reputation and sort of side band profits, but they're not going to make no financial profit from the AstraZeneca vaccine for the duration of the pandemic. So AstraZeneca, they are letting other countries around the world, and I'm telling you things, they were just talking about this today on the press briefing. Which day is this? Was today or yesterday, whenever it was. I think it was yesterday, yes. So the AstraZeneca, they've licensed it, and they've got manufacturers in India and manufacturers in South Korea already making it. I think Brazil is going to be making it, Japan's going to be making it. And they have not just given them permission, they've also been actively involved in technology transfer, in training people in India, in South Africa, in Japan, South Africa's another one that's going to be able to make it, in Brazil, in Japan. They're training people around the world to make the AstraZeneca vaccine at no profit. So there's only one example of a drug company doing that, AstraZeneca. None of the others are engaged in technology transfer. So Pfizer, Moderna, the Janssen, the Novavax, none of these are doing this technology transfer. So that is why you're getting a big call from the World Health Organization to use TRIPS. TRIPS is a mechanism, and the Bangladesh is already making remdesivir under TRIPS, but most countries don't use it. So it's actually any of the countries in the world could issue a compulsory license to make any of these vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, any of them. They would have a big problem with Pfizer and Moderna that they don't know how to make them, but they could still have a compulsory license, where if they can make them, they do. And the problem with the TRIPS, and this built in, it's an actual provision that any member of the World Trade Organization, it's built into the World Trade Organization rules that in the case of an emergency, and what could be more of an emergency than this pandemic, then any country can invoke TRIPS for vaccines and for therapeutics that are needed just for treating the pandemic. Or for any emergency, they declare an emergency, then they invoke TRIPS. Now, the countries have tried that in the past, but what they find is they get sanctions from the countries, in retaliatory sanctions for invoking TRIPS. So that's why it's been very difficult for countries to invoke TRIPS. So the World Trade Organization, the India and South Africa are leading a call for the wealthy countries to agree that it's okay for everyone to invoke TRIPS for the duration of the pandemic. And sadly, the UK and the United States are point blank refusing to do that. Tiny bit of movement, but they're still refusing to do that. And World Health Organization are calling that over and over again. The weaker economies, they just can't risk invoking TRIPS without the blessing of the wealthier countries. This is very, very unfair. And there are companies, so we do have huge capacity already, even without invoking TRIPS. So this is the positive thing. But they could get off to a much faster start if they did invoke TRIPS, but sadly they aren't. Now, this is showing how let's look at the situation based on this. Now, if we look at this is the vaccines going into people's arms, actually being administered. These are just doses, so some people need 2 and some need 1, depending on the vaccine. And you can see it's now reached 0.14 per 100, or in other words, 14 in 10,000 are being vaccinated every single day. But at that rate, it'll be a couple of years. It would actually be through to it would take 3.9 years if they each have 2 shots. In other words, it would take until the end of 2024. But that's just if you're stuck at that point. The numbers are going up and up. So now, so this is where it looks really positive. If you look at it a bit more carefully. Now, if you look at that's COVAX, they say that they can vaccinate over a quarter of the world with the vaccine, as long as they get the funding, which they very likely will later this year. Then, by the end of 2021, they've got funding for most. I think it's about half the dose. I'm not sure. And then the rest, once later on this year, and as they get more funding, then they'll be able to vaccinate over a quarter of the populations they're serving. It's about a quarter of the whole world population they can vaccinate. Now, if you these are the excess doses from that's from the which one is the United States, and that's from the is that the European Union? I think it must be. And so yeah, I've got the actual figures here, so let's go and look at the actual figures here. So the US has secured enough doses to fully vaccinate 1.96 billion people. These are the ones that it's not going to release until it's vaccinated everyone in the United States. And so it's the EU, but later this year, sometime after summer, and that is even so then, and EU has secured enough for 1.495 billion. They are releasing some of it, and then they did loan some of it in the United States. It's possible the United States may change its tune. I hope they do. They are getting some pressure to change their tune. So the world total, if you take account, include all that and the other ones, there's several others here in that list, and the world total is enough to fully vaccinate 5.45 billion. That will leave only 2.45 billion unvaccinated. Now, the US and the EU, they may very well fully vaccinate everyone twice because of the variants. So that would still be enough to increase the COVAX total from 2.03 to 3.63 billion. They'd, even if 1 billion people are fully vaccinated twice, so that's the EU and the Europe, United Kingdom, Canada, United States, and then several other countries, I'm not sure which ones it would be, but a total of 1 billion people were all fully vaccinated twice. You could still vaccinate 62.7% of the world population could be fully vaccinated at least once in 2021 using just the secured doses. So when you get people saying, we're not going to vaccinate everyone until 2024, if you look at those figures, that's only possible if somehow loads and loads of vaccines are actually wasted. So that surely is not going to happen. One way or another, these got the vaccine or just not made, that they just don't make them anymore, although they could. Surely that's not going to happen. So, and then if you look at the total vaccine capacity, if all the vaccines are approved, and the way things are going, probably it will all be approved. The only ones that have withdrawn, there have been 4 withdrawn, 3 of those, because they basically decided that there's so many vaccines already that they're better putting their efforts in other things. And one of them for a very bizarre reason, which again, the vaccine was effective, but there's a bizarre reason why it can't go ahead. Not side effects. I'm not sure if I'll bother talking about that. Well, yes, I better mention it since I've said this is the Australian vaccine. It was going to be quite a big thing in Australia, but they had a little thing they added onto the vaccine, a little molecule they added to make it work better. And this molecule happened to trigger an antibody to AIDS. It didn't cause AIDS, it's just a molecule that had the same antibody as AIDS has. And so because of that, people were being vaccinated with the Australian vaccine, and then they were testing positive for AIDS, although they didn't have AIDS, they just had antibodies to AIDS. So that was a very bizarre reason why, sadly, and they could have redesigned their vaccine, but they just decided to stop at that point. There's so many vaccines going by. So basically all four was for the same reason, really, and we've got so many vaccines already. So apart from that, none of the vaccines have failed. So the total vaccine capacity is 11.15 billion, and that's enough to vaccinate the whole world population of 7.9 billion, and including the children, and then fully vaccinate 2.25 billion a second time. So you could vaccinate 2.25 billion a second time in the fall. And that's just based on the vaccine capacity we have already. So with these figures, it's really hard to see that the world will, to believe that the world will not be close to fully vaccinating everyone by the end of this year. The only way it could not fully vaccinate everyone is if you have billions of doses being stockpiled or just not being made. So I just worked out the figures there. And then if you look at the capacity for next year, 2022, then if all the vaccines are approved, which in phase 3 and the fully ones are expected to be approved, if they are all approved, and perhaps with some tweaks in some cases, then we have enough vaccine capacity to make enough vaccines to vaccinate everyone every 3 months through the year. And it's a huge improvement. Before this, we had nothing like this vaccine capacity in the world. And this is going to be a huge improvement going forward for all the other vaccines that people want to make. Because they're making new factories, employing new people to make these COVID vaccines. Around the world there's a big increase in the manufacture of vaccines. So in the future we'll have much higher world capacity for other things. Like measles, like rubella, like all the other things we have vaccines for. Then the world will have a hugely increased capacity in the future because of this big build-up for COVAX, for COVID. So in 2022 we'll be able to vaccinate, if we still need to, vaccinate everyone every 3 months with fully vaccinate if we continue with this capacity increase. So we can, so long as we fund it, then we can do it. So when people say it's going to take until 2024, they're just saying if we don't fund COVAX, and if we keep all our doses and we don't give them to other countries, but they are going to give them to other countries. United Kingdom, after it's vaccinated everyone, will give its doses to other countries. Some European countries, especially France, are already giving some of their doses away, and the United States is going to give its doses away. Canada is going to give its doses away. It's another one that has ordered far too many doses. Just to explain why they have so many doses, is because they were hedging their bets. So the United States ordered enough of Pfizer, enough of Novavax, enough of Moderna, and enough of AstraZeneca, enough of every single vaccine to vaccinate everyone. And then, so they ended up with a huge surplus because all the vaccines ended up being very effective. And so that's why we've got so many. And by the way, another reason to get straight into arms is that the AstraZeneca they have in the United States is very effective right now, but as new variants develop, then it'll get less effective. So it should be used right now while it's at its most effective. It doesn't make sense to stockpile. It simply makes no sense to stockpile vaccines. No sense at all. If the United States gives away its AstraZeneca vaccines now, then the ones it'll get back in exchange, a few weeks from now, then it's not impossible that maybe not as soon as that, but the ones they get back, it depends. They might well not use AstraZeneca. They might well even not use AstraZeneca because they're mainly using Pfizer and Moderna. They haven't yet decided if they're going to use AstraZeneca and how much they're going to use it. They're just stockpiling on it in case they need it. And if they get AstraZeneca later on, then it might well be a later version of AstraZeneca that deals with the variants. So they should get it straight into arms right away. It makes no medical sense, it makes no ethical sense, it makes no economic sense either, because countries being very hard hit by the pandemic economically, and this affects the goods that the United States buys from the rest of the world. This whole thing makes absolute. I'm trained as a logician, you see. I'm trained in mathematics, and then my postgraduate was in logic, in the logic of mathematics. Very, very precise form of logic needed into looking at the foundations of mathematics. I worked on the foundations of mathematics for my postgraduate work. So I see things in a very clear, logical way. And then I also trained in philosophy and ethics. Just philosophy generally. I did 2 undergraduate degrees, one in maths, where I got a good first class degree in maths, no surprise. And then I got a second degree, I did a second undergraduate degree in philosophy. And in that time I then became familiar with ethics and among all the other aspects of philosophy. So that's why I have a very clear view on the ethics here. And it is simply, and my parents were both missionaries, and so I got background in long-term interest in theology. I'm now a Buddhist, but originally I was a Christian as brought up, and a very strong intellectual interest in theology as I was a child. So I've got all that background that I bring to this, and it's multidisciplinary ethics basically, and logic, and it makes no ethical sense, no moral sense, no logical sense. It makes no economic sense. I'm not an expert on economics, but I've read up economics. I've read up what economics say, not studied economics, but read up what the economists say. It makes no economical sense. I don't think it makes any political sense. It just doesn't make sense. And I think I might put this on my Science 2.0 blog, because it may just try to get my voice, just adding my voice to what the World Health Organization and so many other people are saying, that this is just not right. So but the positive side is that whatever happens, we've got loads and loads of doses of vaccines for later in 2021. We are going to be able to, we can actually, I expect all the vaccines to be approved, and maybe one doesn't get approved, and then updated, and then they're going to get second generation vaccines. They're already working on those, and then we'll have third generation vaccines, and by 2021 we'll have vaccines more effective than Pfizer, and stable, and can keep at room temperature, and easily distributed around the world. So I'm sure the pandemic is going to stop, and the World Health Organization, they also say the pandemic is going to stop. They don't actually say it's going to be eradicated, but they did say that before Christmas. Before last year, end of 2020, the World Health Organization was saying that we can eradicate it from the world. Since then, they've stopped saying that. I think, but they say we can eliminate it. I don't think that's because of I think that's just being, what's the word, politically correct, as it were. Not in a bad sense, but just when you hear the messages not going over, when nobody is listening to you, you just talk plain science, and if people aren't listening, then eventually you have to stop, because sometimes saying something, you just get a reaction back that shows that it's actually saying it isn't helping. I think it's possible that may be why they're saying it, but I think Israel is going to eliminate COVID with the Pfizer vaccine. I really don't see why it's not going to. I talked about it in the previous video, because it's got 97%, 94% effective stopping transmission. And so anyway, going back to the World Health Organization, they said that they give the example of Durban Declaration for AIDS, where leading scientists and public health experts around the world called on world leaders to share effective treatments for AIDS. in the same way they are now calling on them to share the effective treatments for COVID. So it's not just the vaccines, it's also the therapeutics. So we have dexamethasone, doesn't cost much, but remdesivir, they cost much more. And it makes it much harder to give it to the weaker economies. And it costs so much because they don't give permission to the weaker economies to make it. So Bangladesh makes its own remdesivir using TRIPS, but most countries just can't take the risk of using TRIPS, so they can't make remdesivir, so they have to import it at high expense. And that again, it just shouldn't happen in a pandemic. It doesn't help anyone. They can continue to sell them in the United States. It doesn't hurt their bottom line, apart from a very small number of doses that they would be able to sell at a higher cost to other countries. But most of their sales will be to the wealthy countries anyway, and the wealthy countries would not be able to use TRIPS. But there isn't actually any formal process. TRIPS, with TRIPS, you don't have particular things you have to do. You just declare TRIPS and there you started it. But the wealthier countries, it just wouldn't make sense for them to use TRIPS because they obviously can afford remdesivir and they can afford the vaccines. So they don't have to issue a compulsory license. So the countries that would issue this compulsory license are the ones that can't afford to buy remdesivir and can't afford to buy Pfizer or Moderna, and can't afford to get in the queue right at the start for these expensive vaccines. So those are the ones which invoke TRIPS. So the effect on the bottom line of the wealthy of the companies in wealthy countries would be very small if they allow these other countries to invoke TRIPS, because they can still sell them at high prices to the wealthy countries, and the wealthy countries wouldn't be permitted to import it from the countries that are selling it at low price. So it just makes, and then, for instance, Colombia was on the World Health Organization. Yes, they were the one. Maybe it was the one on Monday. I can't remember now. And they're saying they've got scientists, they've got facilities. They just need to be told how to make the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and the AstraZeneca. Well, they can do the AstraZeneca. They would be able to do the AstraZeneca. They just need to be told how to do it, and they can learn how to do it. And with the technology transfer, then they'll be able to set up and start making these vaccines themselves. And they also want the technology transfer into how to make new vaccines themselves. So I suppose that may be a little bit of feeling competition. I don't know, there's competition that if they can make new mRNA vaccines in Colombia, then could they compete? There's so many vaccines needed in the entire world. There's no shortage of selling vaccines, and these, especially, they're just doing it for the pandemic, and they've got the intellectual property on the Moderna and Pfizer ones. They're well ahead of the game on research. So I think that if an extraterrestrial, we are moving in the right direction. It's much better than for AIDS. And I think extraterrestrials move in the same direction we do. I think sometime or another, this is not an extraterrestrial astronomers, astrobiologists. I think many of them think it's very likely that there are intelligent species somewhere in the vast universe, in the galaxy, probably far too far away to actually contact them easily. But if we ever make contact with them, I think we will find, and if they find out about us, I think they will find that the way that we are developing, we've already moved forward from AIDS, and I think what we're doing now, beginning to work together more and more, we're seeing, look at it positive, not glass half empty, but glass half full. Look at India sharing half its doses, look at China sharing its doses, looking at France giving away 5% straight away. Then it's only 1 in 20, but it's a lot better than nothing. Remember, there's a few thousand can vaccinate all the health workers in an African country. So 5% of France's doses is not nothing. That's a significant benefit to the world. If you're giving away even 10,000 doses that are going to vaccinate health workers in Africa, then you're making a huge, huge difference to the future of Africans, of the African health service. You're saving lives of many people who would otherwise die. Many doctors, by giving away just a few thousand doses. So I don't think we should look at the 5%, oh, France only gave away 5%. We should look and say, look, France is giving away 5%. United Kingdom should give away 5% too. And France is calling on all the European countries to give away 5% of their doses. 5% of their vaccines. So if they vaccinate 100 million people, then they would give away 5 million, they would vaccinate 5 million people in the rest of the world. It's not nearly as much as India, where you vaccinate 50 million, you give away 50 million, but they would vaccinate, instead of vaccinate 100 million people, vaccinate 95 million and give away 5 million. Once you've, the top priority is to vaccinate all your health workers. Nobody questions that. And then your next priority is to vaccinate all the most vulnerable, the very elderly, people in care homes, the most vulnerable people. Again, nobody questions that. Every country should focus on vaccinating those people. So that's not selfish, that's just sensible. But as you get down to when you're vaccinating everyone in your country, then to give away 5% of your doses is not a lot to ask when you consider that 5% is saving the lives of health workers and the very elderly and the very vulnerable in other parts of the world. So that is what the World Health Organization are calling for. And they've got this vaccine equity statement. So I'm not sure I've got the statement here. So I've read it out. I've talked most about it before. I can read up the vaccine equity statement on others. I've talked mainly. Yes, I've got the vaccine equity statement on another page. The TRIPS. Here we are. Do I have it? It's just on the TRIPS. Let's see if I can find it. Yes, here we are. So what they're asking for is they're asking the US to immediately fund urgent renovation and expansion of factories in Africa, Asia and Latin America, and incentivize Moderna, J&J and Pfizer to share the knowledge of how to produce the messenger RNA vaccines and the J&J vaccine with the rest of the world. And they remind the United States that these companies, they developed these vaccines with significant public funding, billions of dollars of public funding. So they don't have the excuse. So normally, when a vaccine company makes a vaccine, they have to put maybe $1 billion of speculative funding into the vaccine and they can lose it all. But in this case, these companies didn't risk anything, or hardly anything. They did it. The only reason they did it, they didn't do it because they took a huge $1 billion risk. They didn't take any risk. They were funded mainly publicly. And so for these companies then to say, and it's mainly the governments really, and the companies, they need to incentivize them to share the knowledge of how to make the vaccines with the rest of the world. And they're asking European other countries to do the same. They're asking the COVAX partners to agree that, because COVAX expect to vaccinate 3% of the world population in the first half of 2021, compared with all of their population that want it for Europe and the United States. And they have the vaccine enough to vaccinate 3% by the summer, and to vaccinate 20% by the end, and they think actually probably over a quarter by the end of 2021. But 3% of the world population, and most of the world population, having to wait months to just vaccinate the first few percent of their population. That's 3% by summer, not 3% straight away. And so their conclusion is, in a world where there are enormous inequalities, COVID vaccinations offer us the opportunity to provide everyone globally, regardless of income, race or nationality, immunological equity to be protected from SARS-CoV-2. The COVID-19 pandemic will not be over for us until it is over for everyone. Right, so that's me. I'm finished now. I think I'm going to upload this particular article and video to my Science 2.0 channel. Anything blog, my Science 2.0 blog, because everything I go there goes for some reason to the front page of Google News for the first few hours, sometimes days. It can, my most watched, most read articles there have gone up to the level of hundreds of thousands of views, of reads. So it's not impossible that I could have an effect by uploading this, even if just a few thousand read it. Then do please try to raise awareness of this, try to share it, try to I don't think many people in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in Europe, I don't think many people even understand what is going on under their very noses. It's only 5%. We just need 5% of our vaccinations. I've already said that. But please try and share this message. Try and share Francis' message and the reason for it. The absolute huge difference we can make in Europe by sharing even 5% of the vaccines straight away, of our vaccines. And do these other things, the technology, to urge our leaders to transfer the technology. Yes, sorry, I got distracted. But the most important thing, yes, to remember these are the priorities to actually fund and transfer technology and try and get some shift. Okay, if you don't want the weaker economies to invoke TRIPS, then what should they do? What are you going to do to allow them to have the vaccines quickly? They could have the vaccines very quickly. They could have the vaccines within a few months, they say. So by the summer, they would be well up and running with these new factories. If the wealthier countries were to authorise them to do that and share and do the technology transfer that is needed. And if the wealthy countries still want to block this, which they are capable to because they're so wealthy, and they can impose crippling sanctions if a weaker economy does invoke TRIPS, then what is your solution? If it's not TRIPS, what is it? So please try and raise awareness of this. Try to get a solution, either TRIPS or something else. And if we do that, then I think an extraterrestrial looking at us, they will see we're just taking the very first steps. But if we can achieve this, then this will be like a huge step forward to where our civilization is heading, to where ethical, responsible, logical, sane, sensible civilization. Basically that's sanity. And what we've got at the moment is a form of I think an extraterrestrial would see it almost as insanity, what we're doing right now. They would see it as these very crude, they wouldn't be impressed by our technology. You know, if they're sort of 1,000 years ahead of us in technology, we would seem just a little bit ahead of stone tools and fire. And these big bulky screens that we have, whatever they have, they wouldn't have things like that in 1,000 years from now. They wouldn't be impressed by that at all. That would be as chunky as paper tape or punched cards or stone tools to them. And the technology of vaccines and so on, that would seem very crude to them. But the actual ethics is what they'd be looking at. And if we do this, then I think we're going to do this eventually. it's going to some point in the next few decades, and we are actually moving more and more, accelerating more and more towards being more ethical and more sane and more logical and more self-serving, because it doesn't we're discovering how connected the world is. And so I think if we do actually do this, if we make this breakthrough of somehow making the vaccine and therapeutics available to the whole world and not just the wealthiest countries for the duration of the pandemic, and bearing in mind that they were created using public funding, then I think that will be the first step towards us becoming a true civilization. First baby step from primitive Stone Age savages who've just gone a little bit beyond fire and stone tools to being a true civilization from the point of view of an extraterrestrial who, if they're kind of reading out, if they get our television signals, for instance, 1,000 years from now about some distant star, and then they might look at us and say, oh, that was the point at which they just started to make the first baby steps towards true civilization. So let's take that baby step towards true civilization and start making, just step a little bit further forward. Take our first baby steps, actually stand up and step forward and actually do something. So anyway, I'll upload this and hope this can, and if you do share the message, if you're an influencer, then try putting this in your own words and check everything. I'm saying what the World Health Organization said in my words. I seem to have some capability of communicating, so I'm using that capability as best I can. And if you have the capability of communicating, check that what you're going to communicate is accurate. Make sure that the people you're talking to, that you link to the proper sources. Like, I will put a link to this in my video description. I then have links from there to the World Health Organization, to the TRIPS, what they say about TRIPS, to all the experts, many experts. And so you can drill down and find all the things that I'm talking about. I'll just put a link to this particular article in my video description. Then you can drill down and find everything else and download it. And there's the title. And I'm going to do a copy of that same title on the probably on the my Science 2.0 blog, and just do my little thing to try and get something done about this.